Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had to save a friend part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗧𝗪𝗧 from AO3. So let's start the video. The heroes of Class 1A are scattered throughout the city, fighting a variety of villains who seem to have taken over. Red Riot, Kirishima, and Inferno Bakugo are up north of the city, fighting a villain that goes by the name of Combust. His quirk is being able to absorb quirks out of other heroes until his body can no longer take it. When that happens, he explodes, causing a great deal of damage to anybody or anything around him. However, he is able to regenerate himself after several minutes and start all over again. Combust has already taken a majority of Red Riot's hardening quirk, so he is rendered nearly useless. He decides to stay on the streets and make sure everybody is out of harm's way in case the villain decides to explode. He looks up at Inferno, who continuously throws fireballs and explosions at the villain. While Combust initially takes the blows, he is quickly able to absorb all the flames from the explosions into his body. This isn't good. Red Riot thinks to himself, if Bakugo keeps doing this, Combust will definitely explode, and he could get killed. Inferno, get out of there now. Red Riot yells. He's absorbing all of your explosions and he could self-destruct at any moment. Then we can kill the bastard while he's weak and foolish. Inferno yelled back. I'm not giving up just yet. You'll be killed. Red Riot argued. This whole area will be flattened. Just shut up and let me handle him. Inferno shouted. You get out of here if you're so worried about this. Damn it. I can't talk him out of this. I can't just sit here and watch him die like this. If only I had caught his quirk sooner, I would still have 100% of my power and we both could get rid of this guy. Red Riot's eyes widened and his heart skipped a beat as Combust used his strength to swing right at Inferno. At first, Inferno thought the villain had missed him, but then another arm came from behind him and hit him directly from above, sending him plummeting to the ground and leaving a crater where he had landed. Inferno! Red Riot cried. Just then, everything became silent, including Combust. Red Riot knew this wasn't good. This meant that at any moment, Combust would explode. Red Riot knew they didn't have any time at this point to escape the upcoming explosion. He quickly ran over to Inferno, who was unconscious. Bakugo, come on, get up. Red Riot said. He's gonna blow. Bakugo could only respond with a moan. Red Riot picked Inferno up and started running away from Combust as quickly as he could. Seconds later, however, the ground started shaking. Crap, this is it. As the ground shook harder, Red Riot came up with an idea. My quirk isn't completely gone. A majority of it has just been absorbed by Combust. I need to use whatever is left of it and turn into a shield to try and protect Bakugo. This could kill me, hell, it may not even work at all. But as long as there is a chance to save Bakugo from the explosion, I'm willing to take that risk. Red Riot then started to harden, shielding Bakugo as much as he possibly could. Seconds later, Combust exploded. Light filled the air and the blast destroyed every building around it. After several more seconds, everything went silent again. Bakugo opened his eyes, his vision blurry and his ears ringing. As he could see more clearly, he could see nothing but small flames and black smoke coming out of what remained of several buildings. Bakugo then felt something on top of him. As he lifted his head, he noticed Kirishima laying on top of him. His skin still hardened, but falling off and severely burned. He quickly got up, gently laying Kirishima on the ground. Kirishima! Bakugo exclaimed. Kirishima! Answer me! There wasn't a response. He looked behind him, noticing the buildings he originally saw when he was conscious now up in flames, with no sign of Combust anywhere. His eyes widened and his heart raced as he looked down at Kirishima. You didn't... Bakugo mumbled. Kirishima. Just then, the ground started shaking again. Bakugo looked behind him, noticing Combust beginning to reform again. Damn it, not this again! Bakugo exclaimed. Bakugo stood there and watched as Combust reformed. As soon as he was fully reformed, Bakugo began to charge after him. Damn you! Bakugo shouted. Before he could make any attack, a green light appeared from almost out of nowhere and struck Combust at the side, knocking him down. Deku. Bakugo. Get out of here. A voice from behind shouted. As Bakugo looked behind him, he noticed 𝗵𝗄𝐴, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏, and 𝗬𝗏 running towards him. Where the hell did you all come from? Bakugo asked. We just finished with villains down at Central. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 responded. And then we heard the explosion. You need to get Kirishima to a hospital. He looks badly hurt. 𝗵𝗄𝐴 said. I'm not going anywhere until this bastard is destroyed. Bakugo exclaimed. If you don't act now, Kirishima's condition could worsen. 𝗬𝗏 exclaimed. You need to get out of here now. Before Bakugo could respond, 𝗬𝗏 and the others quickly raced over to battle Combust with Deku. He scolded them before looking down at Kirishima. His face grew more worried as he noticed Kirishima still not moving at all. He couldn't even see his chest rising or falling. He quickly picked Kirishima up and carried him away from the battle and to the nearest hospital. As Bakugo made his way into the hospital, he entered through the emergency room doors. Some doctors immediately noticed him and quickly ran over to help. Several other civilians recognized Bakugo and Kirishima as Inferno and Red Riot and quickly ran over to take a look, but doctors quickly pushed them away. We'll take care of Red Riot right away, a doctor said. Good, as you should, Bakugo responded. In the meantime, you should probably get checked out as well, a nurse added. I don't need any help, I feel fine, Bakugo claimed. Where were you two battling? The nurse asked. Up north, Bakugo responded. That's where that massive explosion came from, the nurse said. Yeah, Bakugo responded. As he looked around, he noticed some windows from the hospital shattered. Was that all the damage from the explosion? I guess we got lucky, the nurse explained. She examined Bakugo some more, noticing more dirt and bruises on his skin. I know you refuse to be examined, but you should at least clean yourself up a bit after what you've been through. Bakugo at first didn't respond to her, but then finally nodded. The nurse brought him upstairs to an empty hospital room that had its own bathroom and shower. As the nurse left him alone and the door closed, there was nothing but darkness as the lights hadn't been turned on just yet. Bakugo at first stood there for a moment, as he realized he was by himself for the first time since the battles first broke out hours earlier. He then turned on the lights, undressed and stepped into the shower. As the water began to soak his body, he hissed in pain as some open wounds began to sting. As the wounds started stinging, the moments from the past hours suddenly hit him. Kirishima used what was left of his quirk to save him when he could have ran away, and because of that, he is now badly injured, maybe even worse. As these thoughts haunted his mind, Bakugo clenched his fist and began pounding the wall next to him out of frustration. He didn't care whether anybody was in the next room over or not. He needed to let everything out somehow. As he continued to pound on the wall, he suddenly stopped as he had made a crack in the wall. As he looked up at the crack, he just stared at it for a bit, almost in a daze. Then, as he felt the water grow cold on his body, he turned the shower off and stepped out. While drying himself up, he heard a knock on the door. As he slowly opened it, he noticed a small bag of clothes, along with his briefcase to put his superhero uniform in it outside of the door. On top of the briefcase was a note. Come downstairs when you are finished. Bakugo looked at the note confused for a moment before remembering. Mr. Aizawa. How did he know where he was? He quickly picked up the bag and briefcase and brought it inside his room, got changed and put his costume away. He then left the room and went back downstairs where he was before. Sure enough, waiting for him was Mr. Aizawa. How the hell did you know I would be here? Bakugo asked. Well, as soon as we all heard the explosion, we knew it wouldn't be good, Mr. Aizawa explained. So I came over here, assuming you both were injured from the blast. I was surprised to see you came out almost unscathed. Bakugo looked down, almost in shame or guilt. Yeah, because Kirishima used himself as a shield to protect me. Mr. Aizawa didn't say anything. Bakugo looked back up at Mr. Aizawa. Did they say anything about him? No, they're still evaluating him, Mr. Aizawa said. But based on what you told me, it doesn't look too good for him. Bakugo looked down again. Please? I don't want to hear that. Mr. Aizawa looked at Bakugo and sighed. Whatever happens, don't blame yourself for any of this. Combust turned out to be a lot stronger than we anticipated, and we weren't aware until after the damage had been done. Bakugo clenched his fists, gritting his teeth. But before he could respond, a doctor came out from the double doors leading to the emergency room. Bakugo watched as the doctor was approaching them, his heart pounding quicker with every step he took. The doctor then stopped in front of the two of them. "I take it you two are with Ejiro Kirishima, Red Riot?" the doctor asked. "How bad is he?" Bakugo immediately asked. The doctor took a deep breath and exhaled. "I'm afraid that Mr. Kirishima's wounds may be fatal." Bakugo's eyes widened and his heart sank. "That can't be true," Bakugo said, beginning to tremble. "It hasn't even been an hour since you first took him in. There has to be more you can do." "We prioritized Kirishima above all of our other patients due to his hero status and severity of his injuries. We ran every test we were able to and did everything we could to stabilize him, but unfortunately nothing worked." "No," Bakugo said. He was about to step closer to the doctor, possibly yell at his face more, but Mr. Aizawa quickly stopped him. "How long do you think he'll have?" Mr. Aizawa asked. "It's not certain," the doctor responded. "The only thing keeping him alive right now is the oxygen supply. Unless he makes any progress at some point in the future, a decision needs to be made." Mr. Aizawa was silent for a moment, but then nodded. "Are we going to be able to see him at any time?" "We're currently moving him to an ICU unit to be monitored. Only 2 people can visit at a time," the doctor explained. Mr. Aizawa looked at Bakugo. Bakugo was looking down at the floor. "All right, as soon as he's in a room, we'd like to see him," Mr. Aizawa said. The doctor nodded before walking away. "I don't want to see him," Bakugo said. "Not like this. Bakugo, none of us know how much time Kirishima has left," Mr. Aizawa said. "I don't want my last memory of him to be one where he is dying in the hospital," Bakugo exclaimed. "It's bad enough the last few memories I have of him are us fighting villains." Mr. Aizawa put his hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me. If you don't see him at least once, you will regret that decision for the rest of your life." Bakugo stood there frozen, unsure of what to do. He couldn't bear to see his friend like this, in pain and suffering. But then again, he knew that if he was the one in the hospital, Kirishima would visit him nonstop. He knew he had to do this for him. As Bakugo followed the nurse and Mr. Aizawa up to Kirishima's room, his heart continued to pound out of his chest. He still couldn't bear the thought of Kirishima laying in a hospital bed, potentially dying. He couldn't imagine what he would look like, with all the bandages, 4 oxygen tubes covering his body. Would he even be recognizable? As those thoughts continued to flood his mind, he noticed that Mr. Aizawa and the nurse stopped in the middle of the hallway. "Right in here is Ejiro Kirishima's room," the nurse said. Mr. Aizawa nodded. "Thank you." The two of them opened the door to Kirishima's room, which was dark, with only the light above Kirishima's bed lit up. As Bakugo entered the room with Mr. Aizawa, his heart sank as he saw Kirishima. His thoughts were correct. An oxygen mask was covering his face, with bandages covering the top part of his head, his arms, legs, and bottom part of his body. The only sounds that could be heard were the sounds of the heart monitor and Kirishima breathing through the oxygen mask. That gave Bakugo only the tiniest bit of hope, because at least he knew Kirishima was still holding on. Bakugo just stood there, unable to move, not wanting to move any closer. Mr. Aizawa slowly and silently walked over to Kirishima's bed and looked down at him. "I know this is hard," Mr. Aizawa said. "It's hard for me too, considering he's one of my students." He then turned to face Bakugo. "But as a pro hero, it's something I've seen more often than most. All we can do right now is hope for a miracle." Just then, Mr. Aizawa's phone vibrated, and he opened a message. "It looks like Midoriya and his group have finished off the villain," Mr. Aizawa said. Bakugo clenched his fist hearing that. "Of course they did. They're on their way over here now to check up on you guys," Mr. Aizawa said. "I'm going to go back down there and tell them what's going on." Bakugo still stood there, unsure of what to do. He wanted to go along with Mr. Aizawa, because he didn't want to be alone in the room. But then, what Mr. Aizawa said earlier flooded his mind again. "If you don't see him at least once, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Bakugo looked down. He knew he had to stay. He knew Kirishima would want him to, And he knew that's also what Kirishima would do if Bakugo was in his place. As Mr. Aizawa passed him on the way out of the room, he patted his shoulder. "Take all the time you need." As the door closed behind him, Bakugo continued to stand there, looking at Kirishima. Finally, after several minutes, he moved towards the bed, sitting down in the chair next to it. However, as Bakugo continued to look at Kirishima, he was still completely silent. Midoriya, Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki entered the hospital and went up to the front desk. "Excuse me," Midoriya said. "We're looking to see Eijiro Kirishima." The lady at the front desk looked up his name, then turned to face the group. "It says here Mr. Kirishima is in the ICU, and only 2 visitors are allowed in the room. 2 visitors are already up there. So that must mean Bakugo and Aizawa are up there," Todoroki said. "If you would like, you could stay down here and wait for one or both of them to come down," the lady suggested. "Yes, we'll do that, thank you." Ida nodded. As the 4 of them went and sat down, Midoriya grew worried about Kirishima. "He's in the ICU. Are his injuries really that bad? I mean, he did look pretty banged up earlier when we arrived. But I'm sure Kirishima will be all right," Uraraka responded, smiling at Midoriya. Midoriya was caught off guard, only realizing then that he was mumbling his thoughts out loud and everyone could hear. I didn't mean to say that out loud like that," Midoriya stuttered. I didn't mean to be so negative about it. It's okay to be worried about Kirishima. We all are," Ida said. "Kirishima is stronger than most of us," Todoroki said. "I'm sure that'll benefit him somehow. We just have to try and stay positive, for him and for everybody else," Ida continued. Just then, the group noticed Mr. Aizawa enter the waiting room from down the hall and approached them. "Hey Mr. Aizawa, how's Kirishima holding up?" Midoriya asked. Mr. Aizawa was silent for a moment before speaking. "It's not too good, unfortunately." "What do you mean?" Uraraka asked. Mr. Aizawa sighed. "The doctors have done all that they can, but eventually, he may end up succumbing to his injuries." The entire group fell silent. "There's really nothing else they can do?" Ida eventually asked. Mr. Aizawa didn't respond. Midoriya and Uraraka were trying hard to hold back tears. Mr. Aizawa noticed them both getting emotional. "I know this is hard for all of you guys, and it'll be hard for the rest of the class once they hear about it as well," Mr. Aizawa explained. "But for Kirishima, we need to stay strong and hopeful, even with what the doctor said." Midoriya continued to fight back tears, but eventually nodded. "Okay. I came down here to let one of you go upstairs to visit Kirishima," Mr. Aizawa said. "I'll stay down here until you've all gotten a chance, and just in case anybody else wants to see him, I'll go up there first." Midoriya stood up. "Wait, isn't Bakugo still up there?" Uraraka said. "Yeah," Mr. Aizawa said. "He's not taking the news very well either." "Maybe you shouldn't go up there first, Midoriya," Ida suggested. "Bakugo might see you and will want to take all of his emotions out on you." "I don't care if I end up becoming his punching bag or not," Midoriya said. "He needs us to know we're all there for him. Just make sure he doesn't end up blowing up the whole floor," Todoroki responded. Midoriya nodded. "Will do." Midoriya took the visitor's pass from Aizawa and headed out of the waiting room. After minutes of sitting in silence, Bakugo finally spoke. "Kirishima," Bakugo whispered. "Why did you do it? Why did you push me out of the way?" After another moment of silence, he continued. "You should have ran. I would have taken the blow." His voice started to raise, his voice also choking up as tears welled up in his eyes. "I would have been the one lying in this bed, or I would have already died. But you got in the way to protect me, and now look at you. You. He wanted to call him an idiot so badly, but he couldn't bring himself to. Instead, tears fell down his face as he began to cry. Through the tears, as he looked back over at Kirishima, he noticed his hand rested just by the side of his bed. Bakugo continued to look at it. "I don't know if Kirishima can even hear me or feel me if I touch him, but I need to tell him in some way that I am here." Bakugo reached his hand out and gently touched Kirishima's hand. At first, he only placed his palm above the top of Kirishima's hand, but then after a moment, Bakugo wrapped his entire hand around Kirishima's, gripping it firmly. His hand thankfully was still warm. As he continued to hold his hand, Bakugo felt Kirishima's hand gently gripping him back. Bakugo's eyes widened, his heart pounding as he felt him grip back. Tears suddenly filled up his eyes again. He then gripped Kirishima's hand with both of his hands, leaned down and rested his head on top of his hands, quietly sobbing. "I'm sorry, Bakugo sobbed. I should have listened to you, I should have held back, I should have ran, anything but what I did. You're in here dying because of me. It's all my fault." As Midoriya entered the room, his heart sank as he saw Kirishima lying in the hospital bed, and Bakugo silently crying. "Kaken." Bakugo suddenly froze as he heard Midoriya's voice. His emotions quickly turned from upset, sorrow, and guilt to annoyance and anger. He slowly sat up, his back still facing Midoriya. "What are you doing here?" Bakugo grumbled. "I came to see Kirishima and see how you were doing," Midoriya silently responded. The flashback of Deku and the rest of the group arriving to fight Combust played in Bakugo's mind. He let go of Kirishima's hand, balling both of his hands up into fists. "Where the hell were you?" Bakugo mumbled. "What do you mean?" Midoriya asked. Bakugo turned to face Midoriya, his face still red from crying, as well as with anger. "You and the others. If you had shown up earlier, none of this would be happening," Bakugo said, raising his voice. Midoriya was caught off guard by what Bakugo was saying, but then again, he wasn't surprised either. "We tried to get there as quickly as we could," Midoriya explained. "But even if all of us were there, the explosion still would have happened. Your quirk would have been powerful enough to stop it," Bakugo argued. "And what if it wasn't?" Midoriya asked. "We all would have been caught in the explosion and we all would have ended up badly hurt." Bakugo was silent for a moment, gritting his teeth and continuing to clench his fists. "You shouldn't have come up here," Bakugo said. "I wanted to," Midoriya explained. "Uraraka, Todoroki, and Iida all want to be up here right now to see Kirishima and support you. I don't need any of your damn sympathy." Bakugo raised his voice. "Kaken, you need to calm down, we're in a hospital," Midoriya said. "I don't care," Bakugo yelled. "You're not thinking clearly. I know you're going through a lot," Midoriya said. "Yeah, no kidding, Sherlock, but it's none of your damn business either way," Bakugo exclaimed. The two of them suddenly stopped arguing when they heard Kirishima's heart monitor going crazy. "Kirishima!" Bakugo panicked. As he was about to go over to him, several doctors and nurses suddenly came into the room. "We're awfully sorry, but you two need to leave," a nurse exclaimed, another nurse helping to push Midoriya out. "No. Don't make me leave him," Bakugo yelled. "We can't have you in here," the other nurse said. As the nurses both pushed Bakugo and Midoriya out of the room, they quickly shut the door. Bakugo tried twisting the door open, but it wouldn't budge. He then tried pounding on the door, but nothing would work. "Let me in." "Damn it!" Bakugo yelled. There was no response towards him, but he could still hear the doctors and nurses within the room. "Start CPR right away." Bakugo's heart sank and his eyes widened, falling to his knees. "No. No. This can't be it. Don't let this be my last memory of him, please." Midoriya slowly approached Bakugo. "Kaken, we need to go downstairs." "I'm not going," Bakugo mumbled. "Please let me help you." I said. "No," Bakugo shouted. He turned to Midoriya, firing an explosion at him and sending him flying across the hall. Bakugo froze as he realized what he had just done. He blasted Midoriya and he could have very easily destroyed the hallway, or even the entire floor. Midoriya slowly stood up, staggering as he got back on his feet. He looked back at Bakugo, who was just looking back at him in a state of shock. Midoriya then started to walk down the hallway, passing Bakugo along the way. "I'm going to pretend none of that happened, for your sake," Midoriya whispered as he passed him. Bakugo continued to stand there for a moment before finally giving in. He didn't say a word, he simply turned around and followed Midoriya out of the hallway and down the stairs. As the two of them made it downstairs, the rest of the group walked up to them. "What's going on?" Iida asked. Neither Bakugo nor Midoriya said a word at first, but then Midoriya answered. "Something's happening with Kirishima, so we had to come down here." "Oh no," Uraraka said, her voice shaky. Bakugo's lips quivered and tears nearly formed in his eyes as he could hear the doctors yelling to perform CPR in his head again. "Bakugo, are you alright?" Todoroki asked. He didn't answer. Mr. Aizawa finally stepped in. "Alright, I don't know what's going on with Kirishima at the moment, but I'm sure if anything happens the nurse will let us know. So let's just stay down here and try to calm ourselves down." The group agreed, silently sat down and waited. After what seemed like hours, when it had only been about 45 minutes, a nurse approached them. "You all are with Kirishima, correct?" the nurse asked. The group nodded. "We were luckily able to resuscitate him. However, because of his current condition, we won't be letting any more visitors in his room for the night." "What happened to him?" Midoriya asked. "We're not sure what happened to have him flatline like that, but it may have something to do with the severity of his injuries," the nurse explained. "That being said, if this does continue, he may not survive much longer." The group was silent as she said that. Finally, Mr. Aizawa stood up and thanked the nurse. After she left, he turned towards the group. "We can't stay here the rest of the night," Mr. Aizawa said. "We need to get back to UA." Mr. Aizawa looked over at Bakugo, knowing he wouldn't want to leave. Bakugo sighed, not saying a word as he got up and followed the rest of the group out of the hospital. "Kirishima, do not let that be the last time I see you." As the group made their way back to the dorm rooms and into the common area, they noticed the rest of Class 1A eagerly sitting around and waiting. As soon as they noticed them walk in, they quickly stood up, waiting to hear any sort of news. Bakugo didn't want to stick around while Mr. Aizawa told everybody, so he went down the hallway and into his room. "Bakugo, wait," Kaminari said. "Let him be," Aizawa said. "He needs to rest." "How is Kirishima?" Momo asked. Mr. Aizawa was silent for a moment before finally responding. "I hate to be the one to have to say this to you all, but with what we've been told, it doesn't look like Kirishima is going to make it." Eerie silence filled the room. "He's that bad?" Mina said, her voice choked up. Kirishima and Bakugo were both battling Combust, a villain known for causing large explosions and leaving destruction in its path. Mr. Aizawa explained. "When I first heard the explosion, I thought both of them were going to be badly injured. But, as it turns out, Kirishima used his quirk to save Bakugo from the explosion, helping him escape without any serious injuries." "So Kirishima sacrificed himself to save him?" Zero asked. "That's what Bakugo told me." Mr. Aizawa nodded. The class was silent again. Some students, including Mina, Zero, and Kaminari, were trying to hold back tears. "I know after what I told you all, you're probably feeling heartbroken, hopeless, and maybe even guilty." Mr. Aizawa continued. He looked down at Midoriya and the others. "But I want you all to know that none of what happened is on any of you. You all fought hard to the best of your abilities. And despite the tragedy that may end up happening because of it, I want you all to stay strong. For Kirishima, for Bakugo, and for your own sake as well." The class didn't respond. "I already spoke with the other teachers, and they told me not to have you guys worry about class for the next couple of days," Mr. Aizawa said. "That being said, I want you all to take this time and visit Kirishima while you still can." The class immediately nodded at his request. "Good," Mr. Aizawa nodded. "And lastly, I know I just told you all a lot of tough news, but still try and get some rest tonight. You all need it after everything that's gone on." With that, Mr. Aizawa left the common area. Kaminari shook his head and started walking down the hall. Mina and Zero quickly followed. "Wait, where are you going?" Mina asked. "I want to talk to Bakugo," Kaminari responded. "I really don't think that's a good idea," Zero said. "He still deserves to know that we're going to be there for him," Kaminari said. "Us." The rest of the class watched as Kaminari walked off, with Mina and Zero following behind. They then noticed Midoriya with his head down, walking over to the couch and sitting down. "Midoriya," Uraraka said. "I know this is hard. I can't help but blame myself somehow," Midoriya said, almost emotionless. "What if we did make it there before the explosion? Even if we could make it there before then, we all would have been caught in the blast," Ida explained. "Based on the range of the explosion, we wouldn't have been able to escape it even with our quirks. We would have all been seriously injured from it. I tried telling Bakugo that when he started yelling at me, but he wouldn't listen," Midoriya explained. "And then it got to a point where he attacked me. I know he's always been a stubborn ass towards you. But he's going through a lot right now. Todoroki explained. He may end up losing the only person in our class who he considered a friend. It doesn't justify him hurting you, but that's probably his only way of getting his emotions out. Midoriya felt tears running down his cheeks. Uraraka put her hand on his shoulder as she noticed him crying. All I wanted was to be there for him. Midoriya cried. And we are going to be there for him, Uraraka said. We just have to give him time. Kaminari, Mina, and Sero walked up to Bakugo's room. Kaminari knocked on the door. Bakugo, it's us, Kaminari said. Can we come in? Bakugo was lying in his bed, tears in his eyes and his back facing the door. He couldn't take it upon himself to say anything to them. He didn't want them to see him like this. Kaminari knocked on the door again. Bakugo clenched his fist tightly. Go the hell away, Kaminari. Maybe we should just let him be, Mina said. Kaminari was silent for a moment before leaning against the door. Bakugo, I don't know if you're even hearing this or not. Or maybe you are, and you're just ignoring me like usual, and that's fine too, I guess, Kaminari said. But we just want you to know that you're not alone in any of this. Tears started to come down Bakugo's face. Don't start with this damn sympathy stuff with me, Kaminari. I don't want to hear it. I know we probably aren't feeling the same pain you're feeling right now, but Kirishima is our friend too, and we're just as heartbroken to hear about him. Kaminari continued. But I know we can all make it through this, and we just want to help you too in any way we can. Bakugo didn't want to hear it anymore. Go the hell away, Bakugo yelled, his voice cracked up with emotion. Their hearts sank as they heard Bakugo say that. None of them had ever heard Bakugo sound like that before. Defeated, Kaminari walked away from his room and back down the hall. Hey, don't be so hard on yourself, okay? Sero told Kaminari. It's not that, Kaminari said. I've just never heard him act like that before. He's taking this so badly, Mina said. If he would let us, I would give him a hug and just never let go. I'm really hoping what Mr. Aizawa said isn't true, Sero said. I really hope Kirishima doesn't die. Well, by what we've heard, it's gonna take a miracle for him to survive, Mina said. Well, Mr. Aizawa told us to still remain strong and hopeful, and that's exactly what I'm going to do, Kaminari said. The three of them met up with the rest of the class. Were you able to talk to Bakugo? Jirou asked. No, he sent us away, Kaminari said. It wasn't out of his usual anger, though. It sounded like he was crying. Then I think it's best that we give him the space he needs, Shoji said. Agreed. Ida nodded. I think it's best that we all get some rest. It's been a long night. The class agreed, and they all decided to go to their own rooms. Although most of them were restless the entire night. Bakugo opened his eyes, hearing his alarm clock ringing on his nightstand. He sighed, turning it off and sat up in his bed. As he rubbed his eyes in exhaustion, that's when he had realized he had actually fallen asleep. He never recalled actually closing his eyes. It felt as if he was blinking. Then, as he felt his face, he realized it was drier than usual. That's when it dawned on him that he cried himself to sleep and everything that happened before wasn't a dream. He didn't have any more tears to shed. It's as if his body had run out. He was just this emotionless zombie as he slowly got out of bed. As he changed into a shirt and sweatpants, he looked over at the time. It was only 7:30 a.m. That's when he would usually wake up for classes. Right. I don't have any classes today. Maybe I should just go back to bed. Then he remembered something. Visiting hours at the hospital start at 8 a.m. He knew he had to go over there, especially after everything that happened the night before. As he quickly grabbed his stuff and left his room, he slowly opened his bedroom door, stepped into the hallway and closed it shut behind him. As he walked down the hallway and into the common area, it was unusually quiet. Normally, people would be rushing to get ready for school or eating breakfast. It felt weird. Although he didn't blame them, they were probably taking advantage of being able to sleep in. He probably would have too if it weren't for Kirishima. After leaving the dorms, he made his way down the street, catching a bus that would take him into the city. After around 20 minutes, the bus had arrived at a spot near the hospital. As he made his way to the front of the hospital, he looked down at his phone. It was 8:05. His heart started racing as he looked back up at the hospital. Who knows what could have happened to Kirishima while he was away. After a moment, he finally continued walking and went into the hospital. He paused again as he entered the hospital waiting room. Looking around, he began getting flashbacks from last night. His flashbacks were interrupted as somebody was trying to get his attention. "Sir, how can I help you?" a woman at the front desk asked. "Oh right," Bakugo said, approaching the desk. "I'm here to see Ejiro Kirishima. He's in intensive care, and I'm aware of the 2-visitor rule." "Yes, you were the one who nearly destroyed the floor, weren't you?" the woman asked, still with a smile on her face. Bakugo flinched, his eyes widening. "How the hell did you know?" "Everybody felt it," the woman responded. "Now I myself wasn't there, but it was quite the talk around the hospital." "I am sorry, I was just..." Bakugo panicked. "Don't worry, nobody was hurt and nothing was damaged," the woman explained. "Given the circumstances you were under, they decided to let it slide." Bakugo breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you." The woman handed him a visitor's pass, still smiling brightly. "Just don't let it happen again or you will be banned." "Yup. No problem," Bakugo nervously responded before heading towards the elevator. As the elevator reached the ICU floor, Bakugo stepped out and headed towards Kirishima's room. As he was about to enter, he noticed a nurse coming out. "Excuse me, nurse," Bakugo said. "How is he doing?" "Thankfully, nothing dramatic happened since last night," the nurse said. Bakugo felt relieved knowing that. "That's good to know, thank you. We were able to figure out why his heart gave out last night," the nurse explained. "As it turns out, his body was put under a lot of stress." "What type of stress is unknown? Could it have been his injuries?" Bakugo asked. "Possibly," the nurse said. "But with the argument you had last night with that boy, that could have also been a factor." "Why would that happen?" Bakugo asked. "Well, some patients, despite being comatose, can still hear and feel everything in the outside world and can react to it," the nurse explained. Bakugo's eyes widened as the nurse said that. He then thought back to last night when he held Kirishima's hand and he gripped back, and when he started crying. So this means Kirishima could have felt me grabbing his hand last night. That also means he could have heard me cry last night. Damn it, if Kirishima were to wake up from this and remember everything, I would never hear the end of it. Bakugo then remembered the argument he had with Midoriya and Kirishima nearly flatlining. His heart sank. That would also mean Kirishima may have heard me yelling at Deku. He would always be the one to stop me from doing anything crazy, and knowing he couldn't do anything to stop me probably caused all the stress that nearly ended his life. Bakugo clenched his fist. He looked down at the floor and tears formed in his eyes. "It's my fault that this happened," Bakugo mumbled to himself. Without acknowledging the nurse, he walked into the room, closing the door behind him. He stood there for a moment before walking over and sitting next to Kirishima's bed. He looked down at Kirishima's hand again, and without any hesitation, he grabbed it with both of his hands, tears rolling down his face. "Damn it, Kirishima. I'm so sorry," Bakugo cried. "If what the nurse told me was true, I could have been the reason that you could have died." Bakugo continued to sob silently before talking again. "I really can be careless," Bakugo whispered. "And it wasn't until now that I actually realized it, or even admitted it to myself." He then looked over at Kirishima. "I promise that's going to change. Even when you're not around anymore, I am going to make sure I change that. And if I start becoming careless again, you haunt my ass until I snap out of it, you hear me?" Bakugo felt Kirishima gripping onto his hand again. This time it was stronger than it was last night. Even though it was only a tiny bit, Bakugo noticed it. Despite everything Kirishima went through, he was still determined to make it through. Bakugo smiled. This gave him hope he had needed for what felt like an eternity. "Yeah, you heard me," Bakugo mumbled. He heard a knock on the door. Bakugo let go of Kirishima's hand and turned around as Mr. Aizawa entered the room. "Of course you snuck out of the dorms to come here," Mr. Aizawa said. "I had to," Bakugo said. "Especially after last night. Next time, at least leave a note or something," Mr. Aizawa said. Bakugo nodded. "Anyways, the class is all waiting down in the lobby to visit Kirishima," he continued. "It's up to you whether or not you want to stay up here." Bakugo looked over at Kirishima before looking back up at Mr. Aizawa. "Yeah, I can wait down there. Mr. Aizawa was surprised by his response, especially after last night, but he didn't show it and didn't question it. After a couple minutes, the two of them headed downstairs. Throughout the day, Class 1A went up 2 at a time to visit Kirishima. Kaminari and Mina were the first two to visit. The two of them both got Kirishima a ton of gifts from the gift shop, from teddy bears to flowers. Momo and Jiro also brought stuff of their own to help decorate the hospital room as well. As Uraraka and Ida were the next two visitors to go upstairs, Midoriya looked over at Bakugo, who was slouched down in a chair sitting by himself. A flashback of last night filled his mind again of the two of them arguing before Kirishima almost died. He then looked back down at the floor. Maybe Kaken and I could go back up there together again, to make up for last night. I'm sure Kirishima would want something like that. Midoriya stood up from where he was seated and walked over to Bakugo. Bakugo noticed Midoriya walking towards him from his peripheral vision and let out a heavy sigh. Kaken, Midoriya said, do you think you would want to come upstairs and visit Kirishima with me? Bakugo was surprised to hear Midoriya ask that. He almost wanted to say yes. But as he was about to, anxiety from last night began to sink in on him. I can't do it. What if something happens again? I can't bear to see anything like that happen again. He gripped the top part of his pants tightly. Midoriya watched as Bakugo began to tremble, and he started slowly backing away. After a moment, Bakugo stopped trembling. No, Bakugo finally responded. I don't want to. Midoriya didn't respond. He just went back to where he was before and sat down. Bakugo began to feel guilty for saying no, but he felt like it was too late to change his mind. That wasn't a bad idea, you know, Todoroki said. It just felt like the right thing to do. Midoriya responded. The group noticed Ida and Uraraka coming back into the waiting room. Uraraka went over to Midoriya. You said you wanted to go next, right? She asked. Midoriya stood up and nodded. Yeah. Thanks. Who's going with you? Ida asked. I dunno, actually, Midoriya said. As soon as Bakugo heard that, he stood up. I'll go, he responded. Midoriya was surprised to see his response. So was the rest of the class. Don't get used to it, Bakugo exclaimed before walking out of the waiting room, Midoriya following right behind him. You changed your mind? Midoriya asked. Why? Bakugo sighed. It's what Kirishima would have wanted. He then looked at Midoriya. Just don't piss me off again, you hear me? Midoriya wasn't sure how to respond, considering everything he does annoy him, so he just said, I'll try. As they approached the ICU floor and headed into Kirishima's room, Bakugo's eyes widened as he saw the room all decorated with banners, streamers, and stuffed animals. What the hell did they all do in here? Bakugo asked. This isn't some sort of party room. Deku nervously laughed. It looks a lot less depressing, that's for sure. Bakugo growled under his breath. Let's just go. Midoriya and Bakugo entered his room. Bakugo immediately sat down next to Kirishima's bed. Midoriya walked around the room, looking at the decorations. He saw the stuffed animals that Kaminari and Mina both excitedly bought for him at the gift shop lined up across a desk, and the banners and streamers that Momo had created before visiting the hospital hanging up all over the room. Kirishima would love what they've done to his room, don't you think? Midoriya asked. As he turned around to face Bakugo and Kirishima, he noticed Bakugo holding Kirishima's hand. Kaken? Midoriya asked. Bakugo looked up at Midoriya, who had a confused look on his face. As soon as he saw Midoriya's face, his heart skipped a beat as he suddenly realized he was holding Kirishima's hand right in front of him. He quickly let go and he blushed. You didn't see any of that, Deku. You got it. Bakugo yelled. Oh, sure. Deku stuttered. I mean it. Don't you dare tell anyone. Bakugo said. I won't. I won't. Midoriya responded, frantically waving his arms. Bakugo sighed and stood up. I'm going back downstairs. But we just got up here. Midoriya said. I've been up here plenty of times. Bakugo claimed. Okay. Midoriya responded. Midoriya watched as Bakugo left the room. His mind still flooded with Bakugo holding Kirishima's hand. Kaken, what's going on with you? Later on that night, the class had returned back to their dorm. They all felt a lot better and relaxed after having visited Kirishima. I'm so glad we were all able to see Kirishima. Momo said. Yeah, it was tough, but it felt good. 𝗧𝗏 said. As Bakugo listened to the rest of the class talk about seeing Kirishima, he thought back to when Kirishima had held his hand earlier that morning. He couldn't stop thinking about it since he got back to the dorms. You know, Bakugo said, I know what the doctors said and stuff like that, but I really think Kirishima is gonna pull through. You really think so? Mina asked. Hell yeah, Bakugo said, smiling. He made it this far, he's a fighter. Whoa, Bakugo. 𝗧𝗏 responded. You're suddenly acting positive. What changed? Bakugo froze, realizing everything he just said. He just sat there as everybody was waiting for a response. Midoriya seemed to know what was going through his mind, but he didn't say anything. Finally, he responded, it was just this feeling I had. Whoa, Bakugo's actually feeling something. How about that? 𝗵𝗲 responded. Bakugo's heart raced and he almost blushed. Shut up. He responded, pushing 𝗵𝗲 away. The class all laughed at 𝗵𝗲 and Bakugo's response. After a couple of moments, Bakugo stood up and went to his room. As he entered his bedroom, he flopped right onto his bed. As he lay there still for a few moments, he looked over at his right hand, which was dangling over his bedside. The same hand he used to hold Kirishima's hand earlier. He then turned and faced the ceiling, just staring at it. Whoa, Bakugo's actually feeling something. How about that? Those words 𝗵𝗲 said kept repeating inside of Bakugo's head. He felt this weird feeling in his stomach. It wasn't pain, it felt more nervous. The butterflies in your stomach, feeling that everybody supposedly gets. But for some reason, he's never truly felt it up until this point. 𝗵𝗲 is right. I am feeling something. He held up his hand towards the ceiling, focusing his gaze on his hand. I don't even know how to describe the way I feel. He then quickly thought about Kirishima and the hospital. He knew he couldn't focus on whatever was going on with him. He wanted to focus on Kirishima and the fact that he may actually be able to pull through. He looked at the time, it was only 9:30 at night. But he still wanted to get some sleep. He was going to get up at the same time tomorrow to see Kirishima again. Bakugo woke up the next morning around the same time he did yesterday. He quickly got up and got changed before quietly heading out of his dorm. As he made his way to the common area, he remembered what Aizawa had told him yesterday. So he quickly got a notepad from off of the counter and scribbled a note on it. At the hospital, Bakugo. He took the sticky note off of the stack and placed it on top of the table where everybody could see it before heading out of the dorms. Bakugo arrived at the hospital and immediately headed up to Kirishima's room. As he saw the decorations that the class had hung up yesterday, he smiled. Yesterday, he was annoyed that all of these decorations and stuffed animals were all over the place in his room. But today, he seemed happy that they were there. He walked over and sat next to Kirishima's bed. Hey, Sleeping Beauty, Bakugo said. Feels kinda awkward saying that to you. You were the one who used to say that to me to get me up every morning. Bakugo looked around the room for a bit. I can't believe those bozos did this to your room. He continued. At least they did a semi-decent job, and they seemed happy to see you. He paused for a moment, wondering if he should say what he was thinking at that moment. It had been something he couldn't stop thinking about since last night. He looked around and then sighed. Nobody was around except for him and Kirishima, and even if he could hear what he said, he probably wouldn't remember it if he were to wake up. It's funny, Bakugo said. 𝗵𝗲 said something to me last night that kinda stuck with me. About how I'm finally feeling something. And I kinda am feeling something. I don't know what it is or how to explain it, but it's there, and I hope I can figure it out soon. Bakugo suddenly heard Kirishima breathing a bit heavier than usual. It startled Bakugo a bit, but it didn't seem to set off the monitor or alarm anybody. He then could hear Kirishima quietly groan. Bakugo's eyes widened. This was the first time since the battle a few days ago that he actually heard Kirishima's voice. He never even thought he would actually hear it again. Kirishima's eyes slightly squinted before they slowly began to open. His vision was almost completely blurred. As he looked over and slowly turned his head to the right, he noticed the outline of a figure. He immediately recognized it. Bakugo's heart started pounding out of his chest as he saw Kirishima opening his eyes and looking over towards him. He noticed Kirishima smiling. Kirishima? Bakugo asked. Bakugo, Kirishima mumbled. Tears immediately started forming in Bakugo's eyes. His friend was awake. Why, you're awake, Bakugo exclaimed. How do you feel? I feel. Kirishima tried to respond. But before he could say anything else, he lost consciousness again. Bakugo was on edge, continuously looking at Kirishima and the monitors, hoping nothing bad was happening. But nothing happened. Everything was the same as it was before. Tears started falling down Bakugo's face. They weren't tears of upset, guilt, or fear for once. They were tears of joy. They said you wouldn't wake up, Bakugo cried. But you did, and you saw me and said my name. He grabbed onto Kirishima's hand, gripping them tightly as he continued to cry. You idiot. I'm so proud of you. Midoriya, Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki all entered the hospital. As they entered the waiting room, one of the nurses recognized them and approached them. You four must be with Eijiro Kirishima. Is that correct? The nurse asked. Yes, ma'am. Midoriya nodded. You guys came in at just the right time. The nurse smiled. Not too long ago, he seemed to have regained consciousness. The group gasped, mainly in shock. He's awake, Ida asked. He's been falling in and out of consciousness for the past half hour or so, the nurse said. He's only been able to remain conscious for at most 30 seconds at a time. Still, that's amazing, Uraraka exclaimed. It certainly is. He's amazed all of us. The nurse smiled. Especially that blonde-haired boy. He was the first to see him wake up. It takes a lot to make Bakugo happy, Todoroki said. I'm sure he's relieved. Well, I don't want to wait any longer, Midoriya said. Can we go up and see him? The nurse smiled and nodded. Absolutely. The nurse gave Midoriya a visitor's pass, and he decided to go up to see Kirishima first. As he went upstairs and entered his room, Midoriya walked over to Bakugo, putting his hand on his shoulder. As Bakugo turned around and saw him, he didn't react at first, but then grinned and nodded. Midoriya then looked over at Kirishima, noticing him moving his head, letting out a slight groan before slowly opening his eyes. His vision was blurry again, still not being able to see faces. But he could recognize the dark green-haired boy standing next to Bakugo right away. Hey, Midoriya, Kirishima mumbled. Kirishima, hey, Midoriya exclaimed. His face brightened. I'm so happy to see you're starting to wake up. Kirishima noticed that they were the only two people in the room. Where are the others? Kirishima asked. They're only allowing 2 at a time up here for right now, Midoriya explained. But hopefully as you continue to recover, more of us can come up here. Kirishima was fighting to stay awake as Midoriya was talking, but shortly after, he lost consciousness again. Midoriya grew worried for a moment. They say this is going to be normal for now, Bakugo said. Midoriya smiled. But still, the fact that he woke up and even recognized me is incredible. Yeah, Bakugo responded. It is. Midoriya looked down at Bakugo, noticing he was holding Kirishima's hand again. He smiled. I don't know what's going on with Bakugo, but he's happier than he's ever been before. Midoriya stayed in the room a little bit longer before going downstairs and giving the others a chance to see him. About an hour later, the rest of Class 1A came into the hospital. Ida and Midoriya were quick to tell them about Kirishima. No way, Mina exclaimed. Ida nodded, smiling. He's been slipping in and out of consciousness since this morning, and whenever he wakes up, he recognizes us. Midoriya exclaimed. That's amazing, Jiro said. I am so glad that Kirishima was able to wake up. Momo said, tears forming in her eyes. I was really expecting the worst. I think we all were, Zero said. It feels good to be proven wrong. Uraraka came into the waiting room from down the hall and met up with the others. Hey guys, glad you're here. Uraraka smiled. Hey, how'd it go? Ajui asked. It went great. Even though he was only awake for a few seconds, Kirishima seemed happy to see me. Uraraka said. I'm guessing Bakugo was up there with you too? Kaminari asked. Uraraka nodded. Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen him as happy and laid back as I've seen him today. Enjoy it while it lasts, Todoroki claimed. Because I'm sure once Kirishima is fully recovered, it'll be back to his usual antics. Oh, trust me, we will, Ojiro joked. Well, enough of that. I don't think I can wait any longer to go up there and see him, Kaminari said. He took the visitor's pass from Uraraka and made his way upstairs. About a half hour later, Aizawa finally came into the hospital. All Might entered right behind him. As they looked over, they noticed the students all sitting around one another in the waiting room, happily chatting with one another. Midoriya noticed All Might and Aizawa approaching the group. Hey All Might, Midoriya said. I'm happy to see you're finally here. Glad to be here, All Might responded. And I'm glad to hear that Kirishima is doing better as well. Who's up there with him now? Aizawa asked. Bakugo's been up there all morning and right now Momo is up there with them, Midoriya said. Would you guys mind if I go up there and visit real quick after she returns? All Might asked. Sure, we're not really going in any particular order or anything, Kaminari said. All Might nodded. Great, thanks. Him and Aizawa sat down next to each other and waited. They watched as the students all continued mingling with one another. It's amazing how much these students have changed the last few days, Aizawa said. They were all quiet, feeling upset and hopeless over everything. You've got to give Kirishima some credit, All Might said. It seems like he really fought hard to stay alive for everybody. With the condition he was in before, I don't think anybody would be able to pull through that. Well, Kirishima's hardening quirk may have been somewhat of an advantage to him as well, Aizawa said. Both him and Bakugo would not have survived that explosion if it weren't for his quirk. Those two definitely are a team, All Might said. I don't think Bakugo would want to work with anybody else. All Might noticed Momo coming down the hall. She smiled as he approached her. All Might, I'm really glad to see you, Momo said. I'm glad to see you all in much better spirits, All Might responded. I called dibs to go up next if that's all right. Absolutely, Momo said, handing him the visitor's pass. All Might made his way upstairs and into Kirishima's room, where Bakugo seemed to be leaning up against the wall. Didn't expect to see you here, Bakugo said. Thought I'd stop by and visit real quick, All Might said. Aizawa said you've been up here all day, every day since he first came in here. Bakugo sighed. Yeah, well, that's what happens when your teammate falls and you feel responsible. Young Bakugo, I hope you still don't have that burden on you, All Might asked. Of course I do, Bakugo said as he looked over towards Kirishima. How can I not still have that guilt from that night? All Might didn't say anything because he's been through that stage many times with other pro heroes. Instead, he only nodded. That's understandable. The two of them noticed Kirishima slowly waking up again. Kirishima's vision was less blurry this time and he could see All Might and Bakugo to the right of him. Hello Kirishima, All Might smiled. I'm glad to see you're doing better. Hey All Might, Kirishima responded with a bit more cheerfulness in his voice. How do you feel? All Might asked. Kirishima didn't know how to respond to that. He never really focused on his body too much, just the fact that he was constantly slipping in and out of consciousness. But he wasn't feeling his body give out again just yet, so that was probably a good sign. But as he began focusing on his body to finally figure out how he was feeling, he started feeling numbness around his waist and traveling down to his feet. He thought his body may have been asleep because he hasn't moved it in so long, but as he tried moving his legs, he realized he couldn't. It's as if his feet and legs were stuck to the bed. I can't feel my legs, Kirishima finally responded, almost in a panic. Bakugo's eyes widened at his response. All Might seemed concerned as well, but he tried his best not to show it. Well, I wouldn't be too worried about it, All Might assured him. You haven't really moved your body around much since almost last week. I can't even move them, Kirishima said. Kirishima's heart monitor suddenly started acting up again, and he started breathing rapidly. Bakugo started to panic as well. Last time this happened, doctors had to perform CPR on him. Kirishima, hey, what's going on? Bakugo asked. Two nurses rushed into the room, pushing All Might and Bakugo aside, but not asking either of them to leave the room this time. The two of them watched as one of the nurses used a syringe to put Kirishima to sleep. Moments later, his heart rate returned to normal. Bakugo felt relieved as everything was handled much quicker than last time. There, he should be okay, the first nurse said. What happened to him? All Might asked. It seems as though he may have had a panic attack, the second nurse said. And given the vulnerability to his body, We wanted to make sure it didn't get any worse. He did say that he couldn't feel his legs, and that's when he started panicking. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 said. Well, we can definitely take a look at it. The second nurse responded. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 nodded. All right, thank you. He then looked down at Bakugo. Why don't we give him some space? 𝐼𝐺𝐻 asked. You've been up here all day. What if he wakes up and freaks out again? Bakugo asked. The doctors will take care of him. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 responded. Bakugo looked over at Kirishima and sighed. All right, just give me a minute. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 nodded and started heading out of the room. Bakugo looked behind him to make sure nobody was looking before grabbing Kirishima's hand. Kirishima, I don't care what's going on with you right now, Bakugo mumbled. But you've come so far, and you better not give up now, you hear me? After a moment, Bakugo let go of Kirishima's hand and headed out of his room. The class saw 𝐼𝐺𝐻 and Bakugo entering the waiting room. Hey Bakugo. Nice of you to finally join the rest of us, 𝐬𝗏 said. Bakugo didn't respond. He walked over to the other side of the waiting room and sat down. Is he okay? 𝗏𝗏 asked. He was happier earlier. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 sat down next to Aizawa and faced the students. Well, when Kirishima woke up, he told us he couldn't feel his legs. The nurses told us they were going to run a few tests to see what could be the cause. If he can't feel his legs, could that mean he may not be able to walk again? 𝗵𝗃 asked. If that's the case, it could be temporary, and with some rehabilitation he should be back to the way he was before. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 assured them. Let's not jump to any conclusions until we get the results. The class agreed, and after a couple moments, they continued talking to one another, trying to get their minds off of everything the best that they could. After an hour of waiting, a doctor approached the class. The students looked at him, but he saw 𝐼𝐺𝐻 and Aizawa. Can I speak with you two for a moment? He asked. Mr. Aizawa and 𝐼𝐺𝐻 nodded and followed him out of the waiting room and into a private room. Is something wrong? 𝐼𝐺𝐻 asked. Well, we did run some tests on Kirishima, specifically from the waist down. The doctor explained. And his muscles were not responding to any of them. And any muscles that did respond were very weak. So, Kirishima is paralyzed, Mr. Aizawa said. The doctor nodded. Do you know if it's temporary or if it's permanent? 𝐼𝐺𝐻 asked. Based on how his muscles reacted, it seems as though a majority of them are no longer able to function. The doctor explained. So it seems like this could be permanent. Is there any chance of rehabilitation? Mr. Aizawa asked. The chances of rehabilitation are very slim. The doctor explained. With his condition, it could actually harm his body more than help. Mr. Aizawa looked down at the floor. I see. Well, we appreciate you telling us, and please let us know if anything else happens, 𝐼𝐺𝐻 said. The doctor nodded, and the two of them left the room, walking down the hallway towards the waiting room. What are we going to do with Kirishima as far as the hero course goes? 𝐼𝐺𝐻 asked. We'll worry about that later. Let's just take it one step at a time, Aizawa said. The two of them entered the waiting room and approached the students. Bakugo saw them and met up with the others. Aizawa looked over at 𝐼𝐺𝐻. We've been told by the doctor that Kirishima may be permanently paralyzed from the waist down, 𝐼𝐺𝐻 said. Everybody was silent. Bakugo's heart sank. He knew from the moment Kirishima said he couldn't feel his legs that something was happening, but not this. Permanently, 𝐎𝐽𝐼𝐽𝐼𝐽 asked. Meaning there's nothing they can do to help him? They said that rehabilitation may actually do more harm than good with how bad his body is, Aizawa explained. Bakugo began to feel anger running inside him, and he clenched his fists, biting his lip, trying to hold back. If that's the case, that means he might not be in the hero course anymore, Midoriya said. That's all bull crap, Bakugo snapped. Everybody went silent again, even everyone else in the waiting room. They were wrong about Kirishima dying before. What makes you think they're right this time around? Bakugo said. And besides, isn't the point of rehabilitation to help people recover and make them strong again? Bakugo, calm down, Mr. Aizawa said. There has to be something these people at this crappy hospital can do for him. Bakugo continued. Kirishima is not the type of person to give up on a fight, especially something like this. He's going to prove them wrong just like he did before. Bakugo then ran out of the waiting room and down the hall. 𝐼𝐺𝐻 and Mr. Aizawa tried stopping him, but he was too fast. He ran up the stairs to the ICU area and into Kirishima's room. He froze as he saw Kirishima lying upright in his bed, his arm covering his eyes, tears strolling down his face. Bakugo almost felt heartbroken to see him like this. He seemed so defeated. Kirishima, don't tell me you're giving up now. Bakugo clenched his fists, growing more serious. I told you not to an hour ago, you idiot. Bakugo was about to go in there and snap him out of it. But as he entered the room, a flashback of Kirishima flatlining haunted him again and he froze. He's already been put through enough stress being told he could basically no longer walk. I don't want to make it worse. For the first time since he first saw Kirishima at the hospital, he was stuck, unsure of what to do and how to help his best friend. He couldn't just stand there and see him suffer. He then thought about the past few days and how Kirishima was recovering. He then looked at him as he was crying. Bakugo knew that if he didn't do anything, Kirishima wouldn't get any better at this point and his recovery would have been for nothing. Screw it. I'm not holding back any longer. He finally moved forward and stood by Kirishima's bedside. Kirishima moved his arm away from his face as he heard footsteps approach his bed. He recognized those footsteps because they were angry. And sure enough, as he looked up, he noticed Bakugo standing right beside him. This time, he wasn't the laid-back, happy person he's seen the past few days. This was the Bakugo he had known before. Listen up, you red-haired idiot. Bakugo exclaimed. You don't listen to a damn thing that these people tell you. You hear me? We were told you were never going to wake up, but you proved them wrong and you're going to prove them wrong again. Kirishima just stared at Bakugo, almost speechless. I told you an hour ago not to give up and I'm going to make sure you don't. Bakugo continued. I don't care how many damn obstacles are in your way, I'm going to make sure you get through all of them. Tears filled Kirishima's eyes again, and he smiled. He then held out his hand. Bakugo looked down at his hand and back up at Kirishima. He smiled and took his hand, but as he gripped on, Kirishima pulled him in for a hug. Bakugo was caught off guard at first, and he almost wanted to push away from him, especially since he hated hugs. But then he heard Kirishima whisper to him. I've missed you, Bakugo, Kirishima said. Bakugo suddenly felt tears forming in his eyes as he heard him say that, and he finally wrapped his arms around Kirishima to hug him back, but ever so gently so that he wouldn't hurt him in any way. Kirishima didn't let go for the longest time, and Bakugo didn't mind at all. All Might made his way down the hallway to Kirishima's room to talk to Bakugo for running away. But as he was about to enter the room, he noticed Bakugo and Kirishima hugging one another. Almost immediately, he walked away from the room and back downstairs to the waiting room. What happened with Bakugo? Aizawa asked. All Might thought back to what he saw moments earlier. He's in there with Kirishima. I decided to give them some space, he responded. Kirishima laid back down in his bed, feeling better than he did before, but he was still emotionally relieved. He looked back over at Bakugo, who was wiping a tear away from his face. I'm sorry, Kirishima said. What the hell are you apologizing for? Bakugo asked. Just for acting so negative, Kirishima said. I know I'm always the guy who cheers people up and all, but finding out I may never walk again. You have no reason to apologize for that, you idiot. Bakugo said. If anybody should be apologizing, it should be me. If I had only listened to you before. Don't worry. You don't need to repeat yourself. Kirishima interrupted. I heard you say it before. Bakugo froze. Why, you remember? Yeah. I could hear you and the others. Kirishima said. Kinda hard to explain how I could though. Bakugo then looked down at his hand. Yeah. I could feel you hold on to my hand too. Kirishima said. Between hearing your voice and feeling somebody holding on to my hand, I put the pieces together. Bakugo blushed. I only did it because the nurse told me that physical contact may help you a bit. It's all right, Kirishima said. I honestly appreciate that you did that for me. Bakugo noticed Kirishima smiling as he said that. His heart began racing. That unexplainable feeling that he had before suddenly came rushing back to him. He found himself just awkwardly sitting there in silence. As Kirishima looked over at Bakugo, he noticed Bakugo was blushing and fidgeting around a bit more than usual. Hey, are you okay? Kirishima asked. Bakugo seemed to snap out of it as he heard Kirishima again. Yeah, I'm fine. Why? He responded. Nothing. You just seemed a bit off. Kirishima said. You've room to talk, Bakugo remarked. Kirishima quietly giggled at his response. He did have a point. Bakugo kept fidgeting around, feeling extremely awkward. He needed to get out of that room, but he also felt like he should stay in there with him still. I was thinking of leaving, Bakugo said, and going back down with the others. Go ahead, man. I need to rest up a bit anyways. Kirishima responded. Bakugo looked over at him. Are you sure? Kirishima nodded. Yeah, that exhaustion seems to be coming back anyways. Bakugo sat there for a moment before finally getting up and leaving the room. Kirishima watched as Bakugo left the room. He then put his hands behind his head and laid back against the bed, staring at the ceiling. I shouldn't have lied to him, Kirishima thought to himself. But I know Bakugo was feeling awkward in here with me. Kirishima then thought back to almost a year ago, around the time where Bakugo was helping him study for exams. I only know this because that's exactly how I felt when I first started developing feelings for him. He then laughed to himself, of course. I could hide it a lot better then. He could. I just wonder if what I'm thinking is true. Which one of us should say it first? Bakugo went back down into the waiting room. He approached Aizawa and All Might. Sorry, Bakugo mumbled. I just knew he needed support. All Might thought back to when he saw the two of them hugging earlier. He didn't mention anything of it. Instead, he smiled and nodded. How's he holding up otherwise? All Might asked. He wanted to be alone so he could rest. Bakugo said. I think we should all take this opportunity to go back to the dorms and rest up some. Aizawa said. Maybe we'll come back tonight. The class agreed and they all left the hospital. As All Might looked over at Midoriya, he could sense through his shared quirk that Midoriya was hiding something. As the class arrived at UA, Aizawa and All Might had a meeting with Principal Nizu in regards to Kirishima. So, the boy has become paralyzed from the waist down? Principal Nizu asked. Aizawa nodded, and they're saying that any sort of rehabilitation could potentially harm him further. Well, they said he would never survive to begin with, so the fact that he is conscious and responding is astounding, Nizu said. So while I do believe their intentions, their conclusions may not be entirely accurate. What will this mean for him as far as the hero course? All Might asked. I certainly do not want all of Kirishima's training to have gone to waste, especially with everything he's been through, Nizu said. I suggest we give him his own separate training. What do you mean by that? Aizawa asked. While the other students train as per usual, one of you will focus on rehabilitation, Nizu said. Then if that goes well, we can focus on him using his quirk again and hopefully things will return to normal from there. And what if the doctors are correct? All Might asked. What if Kirishima's condition worsens from this? Well then, we will unfortunately have to remove him from the hero course as per our regulations, Nizu explained. But I will still make sure he attends UA under another course that is less tedious for him. I think that sounds like the best idea for right now, Aizawa said. That way he can still be with his classmates. Nizu gave Aizawa what looked like a journal. Here, I want you to keep a record of his progress in this journal, Nizu explained. I want you to hand this in to me at the end of each week. I will look over it and determine where to go from there. Aizawa nodded. I will, thank you. From there, Nizu dismissed both of them. As they left the office and went into the hall, Aizawa handed the journal to All Might. I think you would be the best person to train him, Aizawa said. Are you sure? All Might asked. Yeah, I'm sure. Aizawa nodded. Just then, Aizawa's phone rang and he answered it. After a couple moments, he hung up. Who was that? All Might asked. It was one of Kirishima's nurses, Aizawa said. He's no longer in the ICU. And the students can all visit as much as they would like in his new room. Really? All Might asked. Even with the way his body is? It's something they'll continue to keep an eye on, but he is doing much better otherwise. Aizawa responded. Well, that's great then, All Might said. I'm sure the students will be happy to hear that. They continued to walk down the hallway and off campus to the dorms, where they delivered the news to the students. All of them were cheering, excited that Kirishima was finally out of the ICU and that they could all see him now instead of having to wait. Bakugo smiled at the news, but didn't cheer. He slouched down in his seat, almost in disappointment. He thought back to when he was holding Kirishima's hand and when Kirishima had hugged him. If everybody can go up and see him now, That means I won't be able to have those moments with Kirishima anymore, not without anybody seeing anyways, and I can't risk that. As Midoriya was cheering and smiling with the others, he noticed Bakugo sitting in a chair, an upset look on his face. He thought back to the time where he saw him holding Kirishima's hand. He had a feeling that he knew that's why he was upset. All Might was about to leave with Aizawa when he noticed Midoriya looking at Bakugo. He got the same feeling he got earlier when they were leaving the hospital. He then thought back to when he caught Kirishima and Bakugo hugging one another back in the hospital. Did Midoriya see something too? Is that what he's hiding? Later on that day, the class all went to the hospital to visit Kirishima. They were all excited to finally be able to see him at once instead of two at a time. As they all entered his room, Kirishima smiled and seemed really happy to see them all too. Bakugo watched from behind everybody as they were talking to Kirishima, laughing and striking up conversations. He grinned as he watched Kirishima talking and laughing with the class, but then frowned and leaned up against the wall, arms crossed. These past few days will probably be the last time he'll ever talk to Kirishima like that. Then Kirishima will be too busy with rehabilitating and training, and it'll be back to normal for him and the others. As Kirishima was mingling with the others, as he looked over across the room, he noticed Bakugo leaned up against the wall, looking down at the floor. For that short second he saw Bakugo, he had a feeling of guilt and sadness for him, because he felt the same way. But he knew he couldn't show it in front of his friends, so he continued to smile and talk to everybody as if nothing was wrong. Midoriya also noticed that something seemed off about Bakugo. He left the rest of the group and went over to him. "Kaken, hey, are you alright?" Midoriya asked. "It's none of your damn business," Bakugo said, beginning to walk off. Midoriya thought back to when he saw Bakugo holding Kirishima's hand when he was in intensive care, and he looked back at Kirishima and the rest of the class before turning around and catching up with Bakugo. "I think I know what this is about. I can help," Midoriya claimed. "I told you to stay out of all of that. Don't you ever listen?" Bakugo asked. "Why, yeah, I remember," Midoriya said. "And remember last time you tried to help me? I blasted you across the hall," Bakugo said. "So don't make me do it again." Midoriya just stood there and watched as Bakugo walked down the hall. "Midoriya," 𝐸𝐸 called from inside the room. "What are you doing out there?" "I saw Kaken leave," Midoriya said. "So I wanted to see what was wrong." "You know Bakugo, he's not the type of person to socialize like the rest of us," Mina said. "Don't worry about him, come back here." Midoriya stood out in the hallway for another moment before going back inside the room with the rest of the class. He then went over to Kirishima. "Sorry, Kirishima," Midoriya said. "I wanted to try and help Kaken out, that's all." Kirishima was caught off guard by his apology. He couldn't blame Midoriya for wanting to help Bakugo. If he didn't have the entire class surrounding him, he would want to try and help him out in any way he could as well. Then again, he also couldn't blame Bakugo for feeling the way he felt, because he felt the same way too. "Hey, don't worry about it," Kirishima finally responded. "Bakugo's just being stubborn like usual." "Yeah, but since you've been in this hospital, his attitude's been a lot different," 𝗓𝗏 said. "I think everything that happened to you may have changed him in a way." "Yeah, I've definitely seen a change in him, too," Kirishima agreed. "Although I've seen bits and pieces of the old Bakugo as well. Oh, I'm sure once our classes start back up again, we'll see him act like his old self again," Kaminari said. Just then, Ida cleared his throat to get the class's attention. "Speaking of classes, Mr. Aizawa has informed me that classes will resume in 2 days," Ida announced. 2 days. The class all said at once. With Kirishima's recovery having made significant progress, Mr. Aizawa and the rest of the staff feel confident enough to have everybody resume class as normal. Ida continued. "Avalman, I've been really enjoying these days off," Hagakure claimed. "Well, it's not like this break was supposed to be a vacation anyways," 𝐶𝑢 said. "We were originally supposed to visit Kirishima in case the worst possible scenario happened." Kirishima felt bad for them in a way. They spent all this time looking after him and not for themselves. He especially felt bad for Bakugo, who probably wasn't going to take this news very well. Just then he had an idea. "Well, now that you know I'm doing better, why don't you guys take tomorrow off and take some time to yourselves?" Kirishima asked. "Are you sure?" Momo asked. "Heck yeah. Kirishima smiled. You guys spent all this time caring about me. Now I want to return the favor. The class all smiled. Thanks, Kirishima. Later on that night, Bakugo laid down in his bed. He felt his phone vibrate. As he picked it up and looked at the caller ID, his eyes widened as he saw Kirishima's name. He immediately answered. How the hell did you get your phone? Bakugo asked. Mr. Aizawa brought it and a few other things to help keep me occupied, especially with your classes starting back up in 2 days. 2 days? Bakugo asked, his voice raised. Where the hell did you hear that? Ida told all of us after you left the room. Kirishima said. Bakugo thought to himself. All of this is happening way too quickly. Which is why I told the class to take the day off for themselves. Kirishima said. Since they don't really have to worry about me anymore. Well, I'm still coming up there, you hear me? Bakugo asked. Kirishima laughed. I kinda figured you would. Well, it's not like I have anything else to do either. Bakugo claimed. Alright, if you still want to visit tomorrow, make it early. Kirishima explained. Because the doctors are planning on seeing me again later on. I'll be there the same time I always have. Bakugo said. See you then. Kirishima said before hanging up. Bakugo put his phone down and just stared up at the ceiling, relieved that he was given one final chance to see him alone again. As Kirishima hung up, he put his phone down and sighed. Tomorrow is the last chance Bakugo and I see each other before classes start back up again. If either of us need to say anything, it needs to be then. Otherwise, I don't know when I'll have the chance to do it again. Bakugo woke up to his alarm going off at the same time as usual. He quickly got up and got changed and left his room. As he went into the common area and was about to leave a note, he noticed Midoriya slouched down on the couch. Hey Kaken, Midoriya said in a soft, tired tone. What the hell are you doing down here? Bakugo asked. Couldn't go back to sleep. Midoriya responded. So I figured I would come out here until everyone else woke up. Bakugo slightly blushed as he grabbed a notepad and wrote his usual note saying he would be at the hospital. Nobody has ever been out here to see him do this stuff until now, and it felt slightly embarrassing. Are you still going to visit Kirishima? Midoriya asked. Yeah, he invited me. He responded. Midoriya thought back to when he caught Bakugo holding Kirishima's hand when he was still in the ICU. It was something he couldn't stop thinking about ever since he saw it. I probably won't get a straight answer from him, but with his change in attitude recently, maybe he'll say something. He then watched as Bakugo finished writing his note and approached the door. Wait, Kaken, Midoriya said. Bakugo was irritated, wanting to ignore Midoriya and just leave, but he found himself stopping as he was about to reach for the door handle. I know that this isn't my place to ask, Midoriya said. Then don't ask it, Bakugo mumbled under his breath. But do you have feelings for Kirishima? Midoriya asked. Bakugo's heart skipped a beat as he heard Midoriya ask that. He knew it was coming the moment Midoriya first stopped him, but it still felt unexpected. He wanted to get mad at Midoriya for asking, but he couldn't. He knew eventually somebody would figure it out, and ever since Midoriya saw him holding Kirishima's hand, he knew he wouldn't shut up about it. Bakugo took a deep breath and exhaled before finally responding. It's none of your damn business, Deku. Okay. Midoriya nodded. Bakugo sighed and was about to head out the door when Midoriya spoke up again. But whatever the case may be, Midoriya continued. I don't want you to feel embarrassed about any of it, okay? Bakugo froze again. He expected Midoriya to ask about the hand-holding and stuff, but he wasn't expecting to hear that from him. He felt his irritation from before going away, and he felt calmer and even a bit relieved. Thanks, Bakugo mumbled in response before finally making his way out of the dorms. As he arrived at the hospital, he went up to Kirishima's room. As he entered his room, he could see Kirishima almost half asleep. Hey, Bakugo, Kirishima said in a groggy voice. You look exhausted. Bakugo said. Are you sure you want me here? Heck yeah. Kirishima said. I wouldn't have asked you last night if I didn't want you here. You still need sleep, you idiot. Bakugo said. Nobody ever gets sleep in hospitals anyways. Kirishima claimed. Especially people like me who can't move the bottom half of their bodies. Bakugo looked down. I hate that these doctors are saying that you won't be able to move again. Kirishima looked at Bakugo and smiled. But Yue is still giving me the chance, and that's all I care about. Bakugo looked back up at Kirishima. But what if they're right? What if you really can't move again? Let's not go there just yet. Kirishima told him. I haven't even started moving around in a wheelchair yet. I'll be starting that today though. Really? Bakugo asked. Kirishima nodded. Yep, we just have to take it one step at a time. Leave no room for doubt. Bakugo smiled back at Kirishima and nodded. You're right, no more doubting anything. Kirishima looked down at his hand, which was now somehow holding on to Bakugo's. He wasn't sure when exactly they began to hold hands, but he didn't really care at all. He then thought back to yesterday when he saw Bakugo upset. He couldn't say anything to him at the time because he didn't want to disrespect his classmates, but now seemed like the right time. Hey, I saw you upset yesterday, Kirishima said. You want to talk about it? Bakugo sighed. It's nothing really, it's stupid. You know, nothing is too stupid for me, Kirishima said. Bakugo sighed. I left the damn hospital yesterday because I was upset that everybody could be up here to visit you now, he explained. And we wouldn't be able to see each other face to face anymore like we used to, so yeah, it is kinda stupid. Bakugo seemed flustered after saying everything to him. He didn't expect to even say much at all about how he felt, but there it was. Kirishima smiled. I kinda figured you were a bit upset about that. Bakugo looked at Kirishima confused. What do you mean? I was kinda feeling the same way too, especially after finding out classes would resume tomorrow. Kirishima explained. Which is why I suggested everyone have a day to themselves and called you so we could spend some time together. Bakugo shook his head. You idiot, you didn't have to do that. I had to, Kirishima said. Because frankly, I was enjoying that time together as well, and I didn't want it to end either. You did? Bakugo asked. Of course I spent half of it either comatose or slipping in and out of consciousness, Kirishima said. But I still kinda remember hearing and feeling everything, especially with you. And I don't want that feeling to go away, you know? Bakugo gripped onto Kirishima's hand more firmly. His heart was racing, but his confidence grew as he heard Kirishima say the words that he himself couldn't even say. Then we'll make sure it doesn't end here, Bakugo said. We'll continue to spend this time together as much as we possibly can. We can work it out. Kirishima smiled as he felt Bakugo's grip tightened around his hand and as he saw him give the same serious look he had always given him. Yeah, you're right, Kirishima responded. Let's do it. Meanwhile, at the mall, some of the classmates were shopping together. They sat down at a rest stop to catch a break. I really needed a day like today. Momo smiled. I think we all did, Mina said. It doesn't surprise me that Bakugo still decided to go and see Kirishima though, 𝗧𝗏 said. He probably still feels bad about everything that happened to Kirishima. Todoroki said. It takes a while for that kind of guilt to go away. That may be true, but he needs a break just like the rest of us, Ida said. He's been restless this whole time. Maybe visiting Kirishima is helping him with his guilt, Midoriya said. It's helping him give the assurance and confidence he needs to show that everything is okay. Yeah, you've got a good point there, Kaminari responded. Whatever the case may be, let's have him do what he needs to do, Ida said. Classes start back up tomorrow, so I'm sure things will return to normal when we get back into the swing of things. Everybody nodded in agreement before finally deciding to get up and continue shopping. As the group made their way back into the dorms, they were surprised to see Bakugo in the common area. Hey, you're back already? 𝗧𝗏 asked. Yeah, he had a bunch of appointments today, Bakugo said. I take it he's still doing alright? Ida asked. Yeah, he's fine, Bakugo said, starting to walk to his room. And what about you? Momo asked. Bakugo stopped walking. How are you feeling? At first he didn't answer. Nobody really asked him that. They only made assumptions. He didn't really know how to respond. Was he happy? Relieved? Anxious? But he could really only come up with one answer. Okay, Bakugo responded. I'm doing okay. The group smiled, happy to hear his answer. Bakugo then stood up and walked down the hallway, past the group M. I'm gonna go and rest, Bakugo said. Momo nodded. I think I'm going to do the same thing. Yeah, I'm beat from walking around all day, Kaminari said. You guys go ahead, Midoriya said. I'm going to stay out here for a bit. The group nodded and they started heading down the hall. As soon as they were out of sight, Midoriya got up and left the dorms, heading over to the high school. He didn't want to tell the rest of the class about the thoughts he's been feeling the past few days, so he decided to go to the only person he could trust. As Midoriya knocked on the office door, All Might seemed to immediately answer. "Hey, All Might," Midoriya said. "Young Midoriya," All Might said. "Come on in." Midoriya went and sat down on the chair across from the sofa. "What brings you in today?" All Might asked. "I've been thinking about a lot of stuff lately," Midoriya asked. All Might thought back to when he felt Midoriya feeling nervous or upset as they were leaving the hospital the other day. "I'll be honest with you, kid," All Might said. "I've been sensing that something was off with you for a couple days now." "Really?" Midoriya asked. All Might nodded. "We share the same quirk, so how could I not?" "You don't know what I'm thinking about, do you?" Midoriya asked. "No, but I think I have an idea," All Might said. "It's about young Bakugo, right?" "Yeah," Midoriya nodded. He hesitated but then added, "And Kirishima too." All Might thought back to when he saw Bakugo and Kirishima hugging one another. "I see. So you saw something as well?" he asked. Midoriya looked at All Might, surprised to hear him say that. "Wait, you saw something too?" All Might nodded. "Yesterday, after finding out Kirishima was paralyzed, I was going to talk to Bakugo after he stormed off in the waiting room," he explained. "But then when I entered the room, I saw the two of them hugging, so I backed off to give them space. Well, a couple days before, when Kirishima was in the ICU, I saw him hold Kirishima's hand," Midoriya explained. "And then when he realized what I saw, he got all aggressive towards me." "I see," All Might simply said. "I've been trying to ask Kaken about it, but he never really gives an answer." Midoriya continued. All Might began to put the pieces together. "Maybe he doesn't feel comfortable giving you an answer just yet," All Might explained. "Him and Kirishima probably want to keep things private for now, and young Bakugo trusts you to keep it that way. Do you ever think he'll tell the rest of them?" Midoriya asked. "It's up to them," All Might shrugged. "If they don't want to say anything, they don't have to. And if they do, we make sure to welcome it with open arms." Midoriya smiled and nodded. "You're right, I'm glad you feel the same way I do." "Of course I do," All Might smiled. "I want what's best for all the students." Midoriya stood up from his seat. "Everybody is resting back at the dorms. I think I'm going to do the same as well," Midoriya said. "Thanks, All Might." All Might nodded and waved. "Anytime, kid." Midoriya headed out of the office and went back to the dorms. Bakugo woke up to his phone vibrating. It was a text from Kirishima. As he opened the message, he saw a photo of him sitting in a wheelchair and doing a pose. Bakugo chuckled and rolled his eyes. Not too long after, Kirishima called him and Bakugo answered. "Hey, did you get my message?" Kirishima asked. "Of course I did, you idiot," Bakugo responded. "Why the hell are you calling?" "Because you didn't respond," Kirishima said. "I wanted your opinion." "You look stupid with the selfie," Bakugo claimed. "Well, after having been bedridden for basically a week, I had to show off somehow," Kirishima responded. "How do you feel in the new wheelchair?" Bakugo asked. "Great, man," Kirishima said. "I'm surprised by just how comfy and maneuverable this thing is." Bakugo smiled. He hasn't heard Kirishima sound this confident in a while. "You're sounding more confident than before," Bakugo said. "Yeah, I know. I think it's the fact that I can finally move around again," Kirishima explained. "Obviously, not the way I want to, but it's better than nothing." "Yeah," Bakugo said. "The thing is though," Kirishima continued, "my arms grow tired very easily after a few minutes of wheeling myself around." "Don't overdo anything, you idiot," Bakugo said. "I'm not, I promise," Kirishima assured him. "Which is why I wanted to ask you to help push me around whenever I need it." "Why the hell would you ask me such a stupid question?" Bakugo asked. "Of course I'll help," Kirishima giggled. "I knew you'd say that. I still wanted to make sure though." "Yeah, well, nothing's changed," Bakugo said. "Awesome," Kirishima said. The two of them were silent before Kirishima spoke again. "Anyways, I'll let you go and spend the rest of your day off before class tomorrow." "I don't give a damn about that," Bakugo said. "We can stay on for however long you'd like. I told the class yesterday to take the day off for me," Kirishima said. "That includes you too, Bakugo," Well, what the hell am I supposed to do? Bakugo asked. I dunno, that's up to you, Kirishima said. But I want you to have a good time and not worry about me for once. Alright, fine, I'll go, Bakugo said. Kirishima chuckled. Alright, talk to you later. Bakugo was silent for a moment. Should he say goodbye and just hang up? Or should he say something more? He wasn't sure just yet. So instead, he just said, yeah, you too, before hanging up. Bakugo walked out of his room and headed into the common area. He noticed most of the class lounging around, some of them surrounding the table playing some board games. As he approached them, they all looked at him and smiled. Hey Bakugo. Hope you rested well, 𝗧𝗓 said. Yeah, I did, Bakugo responded. He then looked down at his phone and brought up the photo of Kirishima in the wheelchair. He hesitated, but then showed it to his classmates. They all smiled and laughed as they looked at the photo. Whoa, he's finally got his own wheelchair, 𝗵𝗲 said. It's about time, 𝗧𝗏 said. That means he's one step closer to finally leaving the hospital.
Mina smiled.
Yeah, Bakugo said as he put his phone away. He sent me that photo a couple of minutes ago. He has all of our numbers, though, 𝗵𝗲 said. The least he can do is text some of us as well. That would be way too many people for him to keep in touch with, 𝐤𝐪𝐢 responded. Group chats exist, you know, 𝗵𝗲 argued. Bakugo grew a bit flustered with 𝗵𝗲's argument. He didn't realize how much the two of them kept in contact with one another compared to the rest of the class. Let's just all be glad that he's continuing to do well, Momo chimed in. And let's get back to the game, 𝗧𝗓 added. He looked up at Bakugo. Care to join us? No, I'm fine, Bakugo said. Come on, Kaken. You need something to ease your mind a bit after everything, Midoriya said. Bakugo thought about it for a few moments. He then sighed and sat down with his other classmates. Throughout the night, he and the rest of the class would play all sorts of games and order out as their final hours of free time were coming to a close. As Bakugo went back into his bedroom and got ready for bed, he noticed a text message from Kirishima on his phone. Okay, good news. Doctor said I'll be out of here in a few days. Bakugo smiled at the text. He responded back. That's great. Kirishima texted back. Okay, good night. Good luck with class tomorrow. Bakugo responded back. Good night. As he sent the message, he began typing up another message. I love you. He stared at the message for a bit, his heart and mind racing over whether or not he should send the text. And if he did end up doing it, what would Kirishima say? Just as he was about to press send, he instead cleared the message and put his phone down. The following morning, Bakugo heard a loud knock on the door. He quickly sat up. That was the same way Kirishima would knock on his door to get him up in the morning. Bakugo, it's gonna be late, 𝗵𝗲 shouted. You idiot. I thought you were Kirishima, Bakugo responded. He's still in the hospital, remember? 𝗵𝗲 asked. I've been studying how he knocks on your door. Bakugo huffed under his breath as he quickly got up and got changed for class. As he grabbed his backpack and headed out the door, he watched as everybody was eating breakfast and preparing to get to class. For once, everything felt normal. It actually felt kind of nice. He walked with 𝗵𝗲 and Mina over to Class 1A, where he immediately sat at his desk. Oh my gosh, it actually feels so nice to be back in here, Mina said. That's not something I thought I would hear you say, 𝗧𝗏 said. I don't think that's something anybody would say, 𝗵𝗲 said. Bakugo looked over to where Kirishima usually sits. He frowned. It still felt weird not seeing him sit there, leaning back on his chair and talking with his classmates. Mina and 𝗵𝗲 both noticed him staring at Kirishima's desk. Hey, don't worry about it, Bakugo,
Mina exclaimed.
Pretty soon, Kirishima will be back. Bakugo got caught off guard with what Mina had said. That's not where I was looking. You don't have to lie to us, Bakugo. We totally get it, 𝗵𝗲 said. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by the door opening and Mr. Aizawa about to step into the class. Everybody quickly scattered to get back to their seats. He approached the front desk and just stared at the class. They grew uneasy for a few minutes, but then Aizawa spoke. I hope you enjoyed your day off yesterday and the few days we took off to visit Kirishima. Aizawa began. Because starting today, we've got a lot of work to catch up on. Mr. Aizawa then held up a large stack of papers. Everyone's jaw dropped. Where'd all those papers come from? Mineta asked. I take back what I said earlier.
Mina Vined.
Mr. Aizawa continued. If we get started now, you may be finished with all of this by the end of the school day. I've canceled training for today so you guys can focus on studying, unless you want extra homework tonight.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Aizawa, the class said. Mr. Aizawa put the stack of papers on top of the desk and began handing them out to each of the students. The class was silent throughout the day as they began working. Later on that night, everybody was laying around in the commons room, their backpacks scattered all over the place after being in class all day. Ugh. I can't believe how much work we had to do today, Hagakure said. I think that's the most amount of work I've ever had to do in my entire life, Momo said. At least we're all caught up now, Shoji said. I just feel bad for Kirishima, Sato said. He's got to catch up on even more work than we did. Well, that's not a problem, Ida said. I think I could help him catch up on everything. I think if we all pitch in and help him, he'll be caught up in no time, Tsuyu said. Later on that night, Aizawa's phone continuously vibrated as he received a call. He ignored it the first time, not wanting to get up. But then, as the phone rang again, he groaned heavily, reached over, and picked up his phone. Yeah, what is it? Aizawa asked. His eyes widened as he was being told something. You've got to be kidding me, Aizawa said. The caller continued to speak for a while. After several minutes, Aizawa responded. Alright, thanks for letting me know. Aizawa hung up the phone and turned to face the ceiling. Now he was wide awake and couldn't sleep anymore. How was he going to explain this to everybody? And should he even do it at all? The following morning, as the class made their way into 1A, they noticed Aizawa there earlier than usual. They were all worried because they knew this could be both good or bad. As Bakugo was about to enter the classroom, Aizawa stopped him. Bakugo tried not to show it, but he grew nervous. Was he in trouble? Did something happen? Was it about Kirishima? Bakugo, I've got something for you to do, Aizawa said. What is it? Bakugo asked. Kirishima is being released from the hospital today, Aizawa explained. All Might is going to get him and he thought you would like to join. I thought you wanted us to train today? Bakugo asked. We are, Aizawa said. But I think with your progress, you can wait a day. He looked into the classroom. Everybody was silently staring at them, wondering what was going on. He then looked back at Aizawa. All right, fine. Bakugo sighed. He's out in front of the school, Aizawa said. Yeah, Bakugo said. As he walked away from the class, he felt a wave of relief come over him as he realized that there was good news. As he continued to walk down the hallway, Bakugo internally grew excited. Kirishima was finally out of the hospital, and they could be together again. Aizawa then closed the door as he entered the classroom and approached the front desk. Is everything okay? Mina asked. Everything is fine, Aizawa said. Kirishima is being released from the hospital. The class grew excited over the news. You can get excited later, Aizawa said. He then gave a creepy smile to the class. Because right now we've got a lot of training to do and I'm in charge. The class grew silent and unsettled as they saw Aizawa smile. They knew they were in for a rough day. Bakugo walked out to the front of the school, where All Might was waiting outside of the car. Young Bakugo, I'm glad you joined me, All Might said, waving. Yeah, whatever, Bakugo said as the two of them climbed inside of the car. They should be bringing Kirishima out front since we're on our way to the hospital now, All Might explained. Then we'll take him back to his dorm to get settled in for the day. All right, Bakugo said. All Might was surprised to not see Bakugo in a better mood, especially considering Kirishima would now be out of the hospital, but he decided not to say anything to him as they continued driving. As they arrived at the hospital, they noticed Kirishima at the front entrance, smiling and waving as the car pulled up. Bakugo smiled a bit as he saw Kirishima through his window. He was finally able to leave the place he never thought he would leave alive again. Some tears almost started forming, but he quickly held back. All Might and Bakugo both got out of the car. All Might went over to the nurse while Bakugo went over to see Kirishima. Mom. Kirishima smiled. I'm surprised you came. Yeah, All Might asked me to come with him for some reason, Bakugo responded. He probably knows how much you've been here with me the past couple days, Kirishima said. Bakugo became a little embarrassed at the thought of that. He also might know that I assigned you as my wheelchair buddy. Kirishima added. Wheelchair buddy, huh? All Might responded as he approached the two of them. Oh hey All Might, Kirishima said. Glad you're finally out of here, kid. All Might said. You're all set and ready to go. Awesome, Kirishima exclaimed. As they wheeled him out to the car, All Might opened the door for Kirishima. Bakugo was about to help him out of the wheelchair and into the car, but Kirishima pushed him aside. Hey man, I got this, Kirishima assured him. Kirishima parked his wheelchair parallel to the back seat of the car. Then he pulled the left armrest of his wheelchair up. He then grabbed onto the top handrail inside of the car, pushed himself up and pulled himself into the back of the car. Bakugo just stood and watched, impressed. Although he noticed Kirishima breathing heavily afterwards, almost exhausted. You've already exhausted yourself, you idiot, Bakugo exclaimed. Yeah, I know, Kirishima responded. But they said it'll get easier the more I continue doing this. Bakugo huffed. He then walked around the back of the car to get on the other side. He watched as All Might put Kirishima's wheelchair in the back of the car. As he climbed into the back seat next to him, he noticed Kirishima saying his goodbyes to some of the nurses that took care of him. Also sorry if Bakugo got on your nerves while I was in there, he heard Kirishima joke. Hey, Bakugo yelled. Oh, he wasn't any trouble at all, the first nurse said. Except for when he attacked that young boy and nearly destroyed the floor, the second nurse added. Kirishima looked over at Bakugo, surprised to hear that he did that. Bakugo just slouched down in his seat. Finally, All Might got into the car and they all drove off. Kirishima continued to wave out of the window at the nurses until they were no longer in sight. The car pulled up to the front of 𝐒𝐩𝐽. As Kirishima climbed back into his wheelchair and was wheeled closer to the campus, some tears started forming in his eyes. Man, it feels so good to be back, Kirishima said. I never thought I would see this place again. We're all happy to have you back, All Might smiled. And starting tomorrow, you'll be back working with your classmates again. Yeah, but I must have missed so much work, Kirishima said. We've already got that covered, Bakugo said. We're all gonna take turns getting you caught up on what you've missed. Kirishima smiled. You guys are the best. As they made their way into the dorms and went up to the second floor where the common area was, they noticed all the lights and shades were down. It was almost pitch black. As All Might switched the lights on. Surprise! Everyone from not only Class 1A, but Class 1B were all gathered in the common area, wearing party hats, throwing confetti and cheering as they welcomed their friend home. Kirishima smiled, almost ready to cry again. You guys didn't have to do this for me, Kirishima said. Well, after everything that's happened, you deserve to have a party.
Mina smilhet.
Of course, it took some convincing for Mr. Aizawa, Momo said. And me as well, Ida added. Bakugo frowned. Why the hell didn't you tell me? Well, it was kind of a last-minute idea, Midoriya said. And we were going to involve you, but you left to get Kirishima. So we quickly got some stuff together and here we are, Uraraka exclaimed. Kirishima and Bakugo both joined the rest of the classes for the party. All Might went over to Aizawa. So, how did they talk you into this? All Might asked. Begging, lots and lots of it, Mr. Aizawa said. And how did 1B get involved? All Might asked. They were given permission by Vlad, but only for one class period. Aizawa said. Well, I think it's great that they did this for him, All Might said. Yeah, but after today, things are going to change, Aizawa said. We really need to continue to train these students as soon as possible. Why is that? All Might asked. Aizawa was silent for a moment, but then spoke. Combust and some of the other villains have escaped. They haven't been seen since last night. All Might was silent at the news. He then looked over at the group of students, especially Kirishima and Bakugo. Do any of them know about this? All Might asked. No, but they will, Aizawa said. Kirishima and Bakugo included. They won't take this news very well, All Might said. Sadly, it's the cost of wanting to become the pro hero, Aizawa responded. The two of them were silent as they watched the students mingle and party with one another.